We still have some time for me to make a small, very short demonstration here about a new feature in SQL Server 2022. It's a feature that I think it's very interesting feature. SQL Server 2022 is the first one on-premise or on virtual machines to allow us to enable Azure AD authentication. So our users can authenticate using Azure Active Directory instead of using a regular SQL authentication. When we provision a virtual machine in Azure with SQL Server 2022, we provision the virtual machine and we provision a SQL virtual machine, which is a SQL infrastructure agent. This SQL virtual machine has some special configurations that we can make on our SQL Server 2022, and that's where we can configure the Azure SQL Azure authentication for our SQL Server. In security configuration, I already have it enabled here, but once you create a virtual machine on Azure with SQL Server 2022, you have the option to enable or disable the Azure AD authentication. Disable, I mean, it will come disabled and you have the option to enable. Once enabled, you can disable by using this tool. What are the tricks related to this? There are some tricks related to this because the virtual machine needs to have an identity. We need to specify an identity to the virtual machine, which is easy. Here, I use the system assigned managed identity to the SQL virtual machine. I just turn it on the system assigned identity on the SQL virtual machine. And then this identity needs permission to read the Active Directory. This is a bit more tricky. I need to come to the Azure Active Directory, roles and administrators, directory, you see directory readers, and on directory readers, I need to add the system assigned managed identity defined for my virtual machine. Once I add the system assigned identity for my virtual machine, I can now, after all this pre-configuration, I can enable the Azure SQL Authentication on the SQL virtual machine. When enabling the Azure SQL Authentication, Azure AD Authentication for the SQL Server on the virtual machine, once I enable it, I can choose the identity, which is the system assigned and managed identity, and the authentication will be enabled. Let me double check if this virtual machine is on. Yeah, the virtual machine is on. I'm connected to it. Let me show an example. The idea is that I can use Azure Active Directory with Universal Authentication, MFA. Let me remind the user that I hashed it. I hashed the user here. Let me double check on security. The user that I hashed it here, which is myself, but using this domain. So I can connect using Azure with MFA. Then is that. Then is Buffalo Infocom on Microsoft.com. Details about the certificate chain. I ask you to trust the server certificate. Details about IIS. IIS sometimes blocks this kind of authentication. We need to configure here on the server manager to disable the enhanced AI enhanced security configuration. So let's try again. No, it's still seems enabled. So is this the local configuration, the IE giving some trouble? What's important about this configuration is that this configuration allows even an on-premise SQL Server to use Azure AD authentication. For on-premise SQL Server, the SQL Server will need to be connected using Azure Arc. So Azure Arc will need to be used in this case, will need to be installed and used in this case. In fact, this makes the documentation about this feature a bit mixed. If you look for step-by-steps and tutorials about how to enable Azure AD authentication, you find the step-by-step to enable with Azure Arc on SQL Server on-premise. Azure Arc doesn't work on the virtual machine. What you need to do on a virtual machine on Azure are the steps that I illustrated using the infrastructure agent for Azure SQL. Then I need to remember to trust the certificate, connect, and finally, here it is. Supposing that I remember the password. That's it. So I'm able to connect to a SQL Server 2022 in a virtual machine using an Azure Active Directory account. And I did this by making the configuration on the SQL virtual machine. SQL virtual machine on security, we enable the authentication, and the virtual machine needs to have the correct identity set. Since the documentation about how to do this is not very easy to find, I wrote a blog post about this. So I'm sending on the chat a link to a blog post about this. That's it. This is another very interesting feature about the SQL Server version, which is called the most cloud connected SQL Server version. So now we can authenticate our SQL Server users using Azure AD authentication, either on-premise using Azure Arc or on Azure Virtual Machines using the SQL Server agent. Azure SQL Database and Managed Instance were already capable to do that before. The news is about SQL Server 2022.